Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am so grateful that you have found this podcast, whether it was a friend, a partner, or you just found it on iTunes or Spotify. You are welcome here, and all the parts of you are welcome. So thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Maybe you're in an abusive relationship that you just don't know how to get out of. Or maybe you're healing from being in a relationship that wasn't healthy. Or maybe you're not sure what to do because you think you're in an abusive relationship, but you're not sure. This is the podcast episode for you. We in this podcast are talking about the dynamics of narcissistic abuse, tips on leaving successfully, which can be very scary and hard. And we talk about what keeps us in it, the trauma bonding, the finding the potential for someone that they can be so nice and loving in that cycle and what keeps you in it or people in it, and finding healing afterwards. How do you actually work through the trauma, re-regulate your nervous system, and work towards believing in yourself again? Because self-doubt with all the gaslighting, it really takes a toll on your ability to believe in yourself and trust other people again. So we talk about all of the dynamics that go into narcissistic abuse. And Paula, my guest, tells her story of how she freed herself and what that looked like from the very beginning and how important deeper inner child work is. I know we kind of get sick of that term, inner child, and how significant it is to put together all of the puzzle pieces on how did you get into this relationship, and then how do you get yourself out and work out the fears and the trauma bonding and kind of love addiction that can be a part of it. So let me introduce you to Paula Smith, my guest. She is a certified life coach dedicated to helping women who are struggling to heal their unconscious patterns, negative thoughts, and self-sabotage, or who are moving on after toxic relationships. After experiencing her own healing journey following a 15-year narcissistic abusive relationship, she discovered that simply being aware of our wounds behind patterns is not enough. Since many of us develop these wounds between the ages of 0 and 7, which I've talked about a lot on this podcast, years old, while primarily operating in a subconscious state when we're that little, we're just absorbing all the dynamics in our family systems or neglect or emotional neglect. It's essential to heal those patterns and childhood wounds at that level as well. So meaning you have to do the deeper work to break free, to get out of the toxic relationship, to break the patterns that have been there for so long that you think you're picking someone in a different package. You think you're picking not your father or those patterns, but what you're picking is a similar wounding. Your wounds are drawn to other people's wounds. And I talk about grandiosity and shame and how one person has shame and typically will pick like lots of shame from trauma, could pick someone with a big grandiosity that needs control, that needs the ego building. Oftentimes they find each other. So we talk about healing that dynamic. So if you want the healing guide, that's absolutely free and to get on the mailing list, just join or type in Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, BOICE.com/free resources, and you'll get it emailed to you for free. And then you're on top of all the podcasts and free information I have out there. Thank you so much for being here. You matter, you're important, and you're enough. And don't let anyone tell you different, not even the shame in your own head. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Paula. Paula, welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. I'm excited about the conversation.
This is a really important subject that we're hearing a lot about. I mean, we hear a lot about narcissism on social media, or we call people narcissist. It's kind of gotten a term we've thrown around, but we haven't actually talked too much about surviving a relationship with someone and the narcissistic abuse that can happen and how that can transcend to self-doubt, self-worth, feeling worthless, feeling lost, all the byproducts of that. And you've survived narcissistic abuse. So tell us about your journey and how you've come through and up and out of it.
Sure. Actually, 4 years ago yesterday was the day that I left with a laundry basket. I really left with nothing, but it was just time. So I was in a relationship for 15 years and I really didn't understand the dynamics of it. I just knew that it didn't feel good, but I always felt like I was the one that could solve it. I could fix it. I could make him feel better so that I could feel better. Just all of the things that we hear about. And I just started getting lower and lower though. I wasn't able to come back and it was making me really sick. And so I would say a couple years before I left, I started going to therapy and started meditating. I would say that was the game changer for me. That brought my power back to myself. And I was able to start watching what was going on and seeing the dynamics. And I was able to quit reacting and start responding or not, just watching. And that was, I would say, when things really started to change for me.
Because you kind of slowed things down and were observing the dynamics.
Yeah, I wasn't playing in it anymore. It wasn't playing out. It changed everything.
Isn't
for
that
him
powerful?
too.
Because you could zoom the
Mhm.
lens out. So tell
Right.
me, what were some of the patterns? Like, what are some of the patterns of narcissistic abuse? What was some of the patterns in your relationship that you started to see?
I would say the hot, cold, the push pull, the arguments, gaslighting. Gaslighting was a big one. Anytime I would try to speak up, I didn't feel confident speaking up. I would speak up and then it would always get turned around to the point to where having an argument or a discussion, and I never understood it at the time, but I was always left with like no words, just kind of like staring at him at a loss. And I didn't understand it until I understood narcissistic abuse and gaslighting. And looking back at it now, that's what was happening over and over and over again. And then there's that, because I was so wounded, that's how I was like in it. And because of my childhood and stuff, I was always trying to repair. So then there's that come back together and you want to keep the peace for as long as you can. You know that it's probably going to erupt again, and it does. And it just keeps playing out.
So that self-doubt, that like kind of deer in headlights, like you're almost like frozen. Like by the point
Yeah,
you're like, I don't even know. Maybe this is my fault. Maybe it is me. Maybe
it
I'm
is.
the
And
one. Yeah. Talk more
exactly.
about that because that's what gets people.
It's what you're saying, but I also experienced this blank. It's like a cognitive dissonance, but it was almost like my mind would just go blank. I wasn't even thinking it was me. It was just like, what are we even talking about? I would just get this blankness going on and it would just freeze me.
Thank you for naming that because I do think that's something people experience. Like you're just blank. You have no
Yeah,
word.
I would just be in awe and staring at him. And he was good at it. That was the thing, is he obviously noticed the pattern. He knew me inside and out. I mean, 15 years. And he knew how I ticked. And that's the thing, right?
What are some of the red flags now as you reflect and you've done your work? What were some of the red flags that you now see that you didn't then? Or maybe you
I would
did,
say
you
love.
talked yourself out.
No, no. Well, I mean, yes and no. We go into something kind of wounded. There may be red flags and we ignore some because we're looking for what it looks like we're going to get out of the relationship. For me, it was like he love bombed hard. And obviously I was needing that attention and I hadn't had it in that way before. I mean, it was just constant texting when we weren't together, like all day long, attention, also wanting to move really quickly. He wanted me to move in like so quickly with him and stuff. And when I moved in, he wanted me to quit my job. He wanted to support me and my sons, just all of the things, just go, go, go. And looking back at it now, it was, yeah, he was also like bringing me in and slowly taking away everything that I had that could support me so that I was
Yes.
completely vulnerable,
And depended on him.
completely. And that was one of the things that made it so hard to get out. Like when I look back at the things that I was afraid of, those were the things. Is financially, it was going to be rough because, so another dynamics that played out would be, he always made me feel like I wasn't doing enough and contributing enough to the household financially. So he would use that against me. And I was just like, I was working on my own business and stuff. So I just kept to prove myself because I felt, unworthy. I kept giving way more than I should have financially. And I was putting everything into the household so that when it came time to leave, it was really hard. So I had to have the foresight to start like putting money away without saying too much about it.
Yeah. What else were your fears about leaving? What else kept you?
Well, it took me 3 times to be successful. So my fears were the reality of what we face. When we leave, we go through a lot. Our nervous system is just pooched and we go through withdrawal. We're in a trauma bond. So we think that we miss them because we love them and all this stuff, but it does feel like it. It is hard. Like I remember the last time feeling so much shame for myself because I couldn't understand why I just wanted to go back home, but I just wanted comfort. So I was looking for home, but it's not really with him. He couldn't give it to me. And I was used to that. I needed to break that cycle of we would be apart or we'd have a fight. And I just wanted the comfort. So that was a big piece of it. So knowing it while I was with him that I was going to have to go through that again. And it's rough. It's just as heavy as giving up drugs or alcohol. Like it is a heavy addiction. And
Yes.
so for people to understand that,
Yes.
because people, they leave and they don't understand what they're going through. They think that they're weak. They think that there's something wrong with them. They think that maybe they're supposed to be with this person because they're missing them so much. And so unless you understand the full dynamics of it and you're armed with all the tools, it's really hard.
Say more about the addiction of it, because for those that might not get it, they'll be like, what do you mean? It's an addiction.
So it's about the trauma bond. It is about that cycle that I talked about, the love bombing, the fight, the separation, the intense comeback together, the trying to keep the peace in the cycle, things going sideways again, the fight, the breakup, you know what I mean? And it just cycles. If you step back and you look at the relationship, it just plays out over and over again and you get caught up in it. And our nervous system becomes addicted to that. We're looking for that comeback, that comfort. And it is a tough thing to get over. It took months for my nervous system to calm down enough to start finding peace from that.
I'm curious as to like this, when it's good, it's really good feeling.
Right.
Explain more about that. Like when it's good, it's really, really good. And when it's not good at all. But say more about it being like, is that a pull for folks?
Yes. Why? That's the addictive nature. That's what we're looking for. So when we leave and all of a sudden we're not getting any of that cycle, any of that dopamine hits that we're getting from those interactions, it's just our body just exhausted. And we need to prepare ourselves for that. And that's part of what I do with my work is try to educate people enough to know what's going to happen, or that if they have left, that there's nothing wrong with them. That's what's playing out. Our nervous system needs to heal. I would say that's one of the number one things that we need to realize,
and what
how it's affecting us. I would say for me, because I meditate, it was a lot of meditating and a lot of rest. I didn't understand it, but I trusted myself enough to do all the resting and the sleeping, but I couldn't get over how much I was sleeping. And it's not just depression, it's an exhaustion, unlike anything else I've ever experienced. But for first 3 or 4 months, I slept a lot. But I was very in tune with myself and self-aware from all the meditation I was doing. So like I said, I trusted it, whereas I think a lot of people would maybe fight that. But I think it's important for our nervous system to stop and try to find a baseline.
I think that's imperative because your body's been through a trauma. I mean, essentially, you're
trauma over
always
trauma,
waiting for the next shoe to drop. You're always waiting for the next cycle to start.
That's right.
You never could fully relax and feel safe.
And there was so much other stuff going on in the dynamics because I'm with him. I'm also in an unhealthy family. So he had kids, adult kids in the relationship that were always like coming and going. So it's not usually just them. It's the rest of the dynamics that comes with them too, right?
Yes, for sure. How did you get the courage up to leave? So that's the other piece. How did you gain that courage?
Things played out, I would say, pretty traumatically for me to get me to leave. But looking back at it now, I'm fairly grateful. So what happened is the whole time I was with him, I always wondered if he was cheating, but he was a pretty slippery guy and smart, and I could never prove it. The other part of me is I think we get afraid to actually face it because it's traumatizing. And because we've been gaslit for so many years, we don't know if we should trust ourselves. And I finally figured it out one day. It was actually myself that I was working away and I was asking myself why he always freaked out about certain situations and accused me of cheating. But yet I never gave off that vibe. That wasn't my personality. It's not who I was. And all of a sudden, I guess it was my higher self. I've never experienced anything like that before. It said to me, he cheated on you in this certain situation. It was like plain as day. And I went home that day and I said, did you sleep with this woman at this situation? And he started swearing at me. He started telling me that it was my fault, that I got him into the situation, blah, blah, blah. And I just packed up my stuff and I just walked out the door. So for me, I needed something extreme, but my foot was already halfway out the door because he had just kicked my son out of the house like a week before I was there. So to me, it took a lot the third time for me to go.
And your higher self, and I think this is the key, your higher self, you are like, I don't need the evidence anymore. It gave you the information and you knew.
When I knew. When I went and I asked him, it wasn't to know for sure. I wanted to see him. I wanted to just look at him and watch his response. I had no doubt then.
The truth was there. At that point, it sounds like you weren't afraid to find out the truth. So we kind of talked about that. Like sometimes we're afraid to even find out the truth. So we don't want to know the truth. And you were past that point.
Yeah, I guess there was just so much build up to that point. And I think I was just ready to go. I knew it was unhealthy. And I guess I gave myself exactly what I needed. I mean, that was like parts of me wish that it hadn't happened that way because that's then you have to get over that part of things on top of the narcissistic abuse.
Get over the affair or being cheated on. Yeah. The infidelity and the betrayal, which it's traumatic. Any kind of a betrayal is very traumatic in my mind. I mean, in my experience working with clients.
I think I actually did fairly good with that piece. I separated myself from it in the way of knowing at that point that it really didn't have anything to do with me because I was seeing the full picture of everything else that was going on with him. And I was able to just not go there. Do you know what I mean? I didn't spiral down it was hard, but I didn't let myself go too deep into that.
And the key there is you knew it wasn't about you. That's a key piece. When you know it's not about you, there's liberation in that. There's liberation for you to come forward, have a voice. There's empowerment there.
So I am grateful that I had that insight at the time, for sure.
Very helpful. Let's talk about when you're in this, starting off with this relationship and people are like, well, why did you choose him? And why? Let's talk about how our past and our upbringing and our childhood, which people don't really like to hear. And we're not making it wrong or bad. We're just going, oh, there's an awareness. How did that play out in choosing this person?
That's interesting because for so long, if I would look at how things were playing out with myself and the symptoms, I would look back and you would class me as having daddy issues. And I always thought, no, they're nothing alike. Like I couldn't see it. But it was more not the way that they portrayed themselves, but more of the wounding that they were like, if that makes sense. They came across as two very different men, but the wounding was very similar.
Speak more on the wounding for people to really dive into that, what you're saying.
Very just wounded relationships with their mother, for one thing, if I look back on that. Not in tune with themselves and know how to like soothe themselves in any way. And looking for things outside of themselves to validate themselves and validate their being a man. I guess the other part would be having the world have to portray them as very good men. So my ex was a covert narcissist. So everyone from the outside, there were some people that see through it, intuitive people, but a lot of people didn't see through what he was because he would make sure, especially around people, he treated me very well in front of my family, my friends, kind of thing like that. And I would say that was similar to the dynamics too with my father.
Did you see any similarities with your mother wounding that would have played out in this, out of curiosity? Because it's important for people to look at both just to see.
Yes, I think both of our mothers were very caring, but had their own trauma. It made it hard for them to connect with us. So I would say like childhood neglect for sure was common. We
Emotional
both
neglect.
actually, yeah, emotional neglect. We both had traumatic childhood and actually very parallel in certain ways. So we connected in that way because we understood each other in that way. And so I actually made a lot of allowances for him because I could see that.
And you got it. I understand that. That's the
Yeah,
trauma bond part you're talking about.
exactly. Yes, it makes us empathetic because I mean, we all come out of it in two different ways. We either become empaths or we take on narcissistic traits, right? When we have a lot of trauma in our childhood and stuff that's not healed. And we go one way or the other.
We can go grandiose or we can go more shame. And so a lot of times the shame partner will pick the grandiose partner. The grandiose partner will pick the shame partner.
Right.
And there we have it.
Yeah.
Then it recreates that generational wounding.
That's right. So yeah, no, there's definitely, like you said, that's how the trauma bond began. We saw that when I look at the things that connected me to him, it was our play. It was like our inner child could play. And that's the other thing a lot of people don't understand about narcissistic abuse. Just because there was abuse didn't mean that he actually still wasn't my best friend, didn't mean that some of my best life experiences weren't with him, because you wonder why someone stays in that relationship or gets in them. It's not all bad. Otherwise, people wouldn't stay in them. That's the thing. And it doesn't start out bad. You will see a different person for first 3 months. And you're always looking for that person again because you saw that in them and you were hoping that that will come back or that you can bring that back out.
And that's like the mission because, they're a really good person. They're really good underneath it. I know them. They've had a lot of childhood stuff, trauma. And is there a lot of that dialogue in your head?
Oh, for sure. It's really hard to wrap the head around it. Yeah. It's very confusing. And like I said, you put that together with the gaslighting and stuff, and your mind has a really hard time figuring it out. And you're in survival mode the whole time. So you're just getting by. You're just going from one thing to another that's going on. You're always on eggshells.
Mm-hmm. And you're waiting for the next thing. It's like, okay, I'm walking on eggshells and I'm waiting for the next thing. I don't want to upset him. If I just say it this way, maybe I won't trigger anything. If I do or don't do this, or I say or don't say this, or look a certain way or act a certain way, then things will be better.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it's wild. It's an experience like nothing else. And it's important to let people know that they're not alone in it, because when you're in it, you really do feel alone on it. Like I didn't share with really isolated myself from so many people because I think we feel embarrassed and we're also protecting them because we don't want people to judge them because there's that part of us that loves them, and it's a mind fuck. Like
it is. I think that's a big part of it because you don't want people to think badly of them.
Or us, because we're feeling weak. If you tell the story, as soon as you start telling anyone about it, you're just like, that sounds awful. And it kind of brings everything to reality, right?
It does. And you just would prefer not to have to see their reaction or what they would say, or because then you're like, well, then the reality of what the situation is it's more apparent.
That's right. Brings it to light to us more and more. Then we can't keep looking away from it.
Exactly. Which is hard, especially when you're scared financially, you're scared emotionally, you're scared, where am I going to live? How am I going to support myself? How am I ever going to find someone again? Am I going to be alone forever? I mean, there's lots there that
There's a lot.
There's a lot emotionally going on. What's your 4-prong approach? You have this 4-step approach for folks that are in narcissistic abusive relationships. What are those?
I would say first, it comes with having the awareness of it. Whatever that looks like for you, whether that's being out in nature so that you get enough space and be present, practicing mindfulness, getting some exercise or something to kind of give you that little bit of space so that you can look at things. And then I would say, I guess that would be the other thing, would be to quit reacting. Try to create a space where you can start to watch things play out. And I'm not saying give them the silent treatment, but think about pausing and giving yourself to think before you respond to anything that they're saying to you. And that part's a tricky part because they may actually start to act up even more when you start doing that because they're used to getting that response from you. And I guess another piece of it would be to start to reach out to people and create some support in the community around yourself so that if you're preparing to leave or you need support, that's a really important one. And then the other part would be to start looking out, and if you are struggling financially or if you're going to have to find a place to live and stuff while you're in it, start setting that stuff up, because where I wasn't successful were the times that I just packed up and left without any preparation. Being prepared before. And I know it's like if you hear someone in it, you're going to be like, leave right now. But the reality that they're going to survive the leaving and not go back without any preparation, it's a very small chance that that's going to happen. I think I heard on average it takes someone 7 times to leave one of these kinds of relationships. Yeah, and there's a reason for that.
And so how much did therapy help you? I mean, did you do inner child work? Were you?
No, I did a lot of talk therapy, and I actually didn't go for very long. What it did is it gave me the ability to see the dynamics with my parents. It helped me. That was actually why I originally started going. And then I realized once I set my boundaries with them that things were still a mess. And that was when I was like, oh my, things are a mess with my partner. And what happened though was I left with, I think, like $3,000 to my name. I was self-employed. I had complex PTSD from all the experiences through my life. So when I left, my brain turned to mush. So all of a sudden I have a few dollars to live off. I couldn't afford therapy or counseling or support in any way of that. And that's why one of the main reasons I do what I do is because I got my information off Instagram, off YouTube. There's so much valuable information out there for people in that kind of situation. So that was where I got the majority. And I discovered inner child healing on my own and just started doing meditations. And I didn't take to it right away, the idea of it, hearing about it. I was resistant to it for some reason. But one thing, looking back at it now, the thing that won me over, that really brought me in, was how it removed the shame of my patterns, my beliefs, my actions that I had made, when I realized that from 0 to 7 years old, we're programmed and we come up with all these coping mechanisms and beliefs and ways of being, depending on the family dynamics and how everything's playing out. And when I could see, like, how could I be frustrated with this 3 or 4-year-old little girl inside me, that really helped me. And then from there, it just kind of went on. It helped me go deeper into my healing, because I feel like shame blocks us.
It really holds us back because we think it's us. I'm not good enough. I'm defective. I'm bad. Something's wrong with me. And that's,
yeah. And then it's really hard to look at it. We look away. And
how'd you get the courage to look at it? Like, what gave you the courage to look at it?
I was desperate. I was, like I said, financially, everything. I was on my own. After I left, I had to cut even more people out of my life because I realized it wasn't. If you're in a narcissistic abusive relationship and it has a lot to do with how you're raised and stuff, there's a really good chance you have a lot of other unhealthy people around you in their life. It's not something we talk about either. And so when we start changing and setting boundaries and trying to develop healthy relationships, we can end up pretty solid, like, on our own. So I was the only one supporting myself. I was the only one that was going to get myself out of the hole that I was in. They say one step at a time, and it is one step at a time and to go slow. But in my situation, I really had to give it my all to get through. Well, I think because I was meditating in so much, it also helps you with the ego. It helps you remove that piece of things, so that I just developed a curiosity for it instead of a shame, so that you keep just looking more and more. It fascinates me now. I mean, it's part of why I love what I do.
Do you notice when your ego is online now? Do you notice the ego part? Because the ego part carries the wounds. The ego carries the pain.
I find it interesting because I don't get triggered or anything very much anymore at all. And so when I do, I actually find it interesting now because I'm like, what is that? Sometimes it takes me a little bit to figure it out.
I'm the same way. I'm like, okay, there's something here for me to explore.
And do you find, for myself, it hits me even harder when it hits me because we're not getting triggered all the time and stuff. So when something comes up now, I guess because of the awareness we have, I'm just like, oh, it usually hits me pretty heavy.
Yes.
There's no ignoring it.
So you're not triggered as much and you feel like you're able to see the triggers, kind of the ego. Is that what you're saying? from your perspective?
It's maybe not the ego, but it shows me where my wounds still are, where there's still something that is trying to come up or that I'm resisting or that I'm not looking at.
That's begging for us to meet it.
Or if I'm not showing up fully for myself, that's a reason why something is coming up. It's another one.
Yeah, it sounds like you're pretty in tune with your body and kind of getting grounded in nature. Really?
Yeah, nature was a big thing for me. It always has been, but I really leaned into it when you just so desperately need to feel good. And it's hard not to notice how the drastic difference I would feel when I was outside in nature. It's still one of my biggest tools for recharging. I mean, I can be feeling kind of just like overwhelmed or run down. I could sleep for days or I could go outside in nature for a couple hours and feel brand new. You know what I mean? Re-inspired, reconnected. Yeah.
I'm like, take your deep breaths, go outside if you can.
Yeah.
Take your deep breaths, get centered, notice what's around you, the sounds, the sights.
Play is big too for me. That's the other one in the last year or so that I've really focused on, was finding ways to bring play into my life again. And so it's kind of like connecting with my inner child, right?
That's a hard one for folks that have gone through a lot of trauma. Very hard. Very
well,
hard.
like I said,
never were able to play as a kid.
So I looked back at things that I did as a kid. And so for me, it's a lot of it was playing outside. It's music, it's dancing. For me, I recently started learning how to play guitar, just different little things that kind of bring me into the moment. I have 2 adult sons, even just joking and playing. I bring humor to a lot of my content because I figure it helps balance out the heaviness of what I do. So I have fun creating content for my Instagram page because I like to bring humor and memes into it, because I'll do that, but then I'll have like a deep caption with the information and it helps. I think it gives people the ability to come into it and it not be too heavy.
Did you have humor before? Or is this something you've accessed more recently as you've done your healing?
No, I did have it before. I think I lost some of it. I mean, it's hard to find it when you're in the depths of it, but I did try to keep some of it. But yeah, it's something that's definitely, as I've come back into my own and I've done my healing, that's definitely, I would say, a lot more available for me. It's when you're in the heaviness, it's harder to find.
Yeah, because humor can be a defense too. Like, I'm just going to laugh at everything and not feel anything, like feel the sadness or the fear. And it sounds like in this case, you're able to access it and it's the pure humor of it. It's playful, it's fun, it's not a defense. I think that's a distinction for folks.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, I think it's an important part. I mean, here's the thing. We have the light and we all have the dark side. And there can be a lot of heaviness in life. But if we can try to find ways to bring that light in. And then the other piece is, yeah, a lot of us use avoidance. So I see people that like the toxic positivity that are always just trying to only talk about the good stuff, and that way they're like pushing away anything else. They're pushing away wounds. They're pushing away anything negative that's coming up because it triggers them. So we're all of those things. We're the light and the dark. We're the sad, the happy, the angry. And it's when we realize we're all of those things and let ourselves feel all of those things that we really, I think, become whole. We are whole, but we don't accept all pieces of ourselves at times, right? And when we can accept all those pieces, I think for myself is when it really all comes together.
And the shame dissipates then because you're accepting and welcoming all the parts of you.
Oh, completely.
Like to sever off a part of you and suppress a part of you.
Another thing for me too is the whole forgiveness thing. There's a lot about forgiving people and stuff like that. And I didn't think about it a lot before. I didn't try to force myself to forgive my ex or anything like that. But I think it's more important for us to do forgiveness first, like with ourselves. It's the forgiving ourselves that was in the relationship. It's forgiving ourselves that stayed there for so long and that put up with things and do all that. That's more important, I think, than forgiving an abusive ex. I think that along with it, sometimes, in my case, what happens is you naturally can forgive the ex. It happens. But I think when we force it, the idea that we have to, I think can actually like hinder our healing. And I hear a lot of that and it makes me like a little bit cringe a bit, because when someone's been through abuse like that, that's rough.
It's oppressive. I feel like that's abusive too. It feels controlling. It feels like you have to fall in line and do this in order to have whatever
But there's a lot of that messaging out there. I hear it all the time.
And people struggle with it because they're like, am I a bad person if I don't forgive? I'm not going to heal if I don't forgive. And I think you make a very essential part to the healing journey. It's about healing. Oh, I stayed in the relationship, healing, forgiving yourself for picking the person and all these things that we rumble through. And I think that's the path. I agree with you 100%. 100%.
Yeah, there's a lot of growth there. Yeah, for me, and like another thing for me, forgiving that I raised boys in that household. So I work on inner child healing, right? That's what I help with. But I can't deny the fact that now my boys have taken things from that, and it's going to show up in their relationships. I can't undo that. So I have to forgive myself, and I have to have conversations with them. And that's all I can do is just be open, have conversations, and be there.
And acknowledge like the pain or the hurt or however it impacted them and process it with them. So I love that.
Even if they don't see it all yet, that's the other part because they're young, right? So if I were to say, hey, there's a good chance that some of this is going to show up in your lives. And they're like, one of my sons is like, Mom, look at us. Like, we're amazing. We're doing awesome. Look at you. Like, you've done an amazing job. They're sweet like that. But it's that other part in my heart that's like, yeah, but because I see how things play out because of the work that I do.
Because you're attuned. That gift, that is the byproduct of all the things you're talking about is attunement, where you don't have to feel reactive, even if they have like, oh, Mom, you stayed in that relationship. You're not going to have you can go, oh, I feel that. And I can be fully attuned and present and empathize and have ownership and acknowledgement about how you
Which is so important because we can do so much more. This is something I see. We can do so much more damage, whether our children, teenagers, adult children come to us about things that are coming up for them. We can do almost more damage with how we respond to that than the actual damage that was done in the first place.
And we have to watch our defensiveness because our inner child can get hooked and our shame can get hooked.
Yeah, it's just a reaction.
It's a reaction. And then, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Like that's not helpful either. Cause now they're comforting you and going, well, you're a great mom. You're like, okay, you don't have to caretake me. Like, but I'm so sorry. Like this can be manipulative if people go, I'm so sorry. I just messed up everything. I'm just such a screw up. Like things like that can be very triggering. And that can also trigger this narcissistic abuse response too, where they go, I'm so sorry. It's all me. Those kinds of responses. Yeah. So really acknowledging someone's pain, whether it's our kids or anyone else in the mix.
Just telling them we're there to listen. A big part of it is just saying, I want to hear more of what you have to say about this. Letting them see we're open is huge.
Absolutely. Is there anything we did not cover that you feel like is important when it relates to narcissistic abuse?
That's tough. It's a very big topic. I think we covered a lot of what I would like to share, but a lot of it is just that there is nothing wrong with you. If you're trying to leave and you're struggling, if you've left numerous times and you keep going back, it's not you. It's a trauma bond. It's our nervous system. Reach out to someone. Reach out to me. My DMs are always open to chat and get yourself set up. Get yourself prepared so that you can handle it and you can be successful.
Yes. Usually if it's somehow they'll need support. It's like get in a group, get a coach, therapist, an attorney if you need one.
Yeah, exactly.
There's some free services. Communities have free services. You just have to find the networks to find those services. Where can people find you if they're interested in working with you and they want to find out more about you?
I show up most on Instagram. So my account is Mindful Adventure Coaching. And there's all kinds of information on there. I actually have a guide on there. And it's a guide to leaving narcissistic abusive relationships. It's a free PDF, so you can check that out. And like I said, my DMs are always open. Even if someone can't afford coaching or whatever, I'm totally there to give people pointers and just give people support.
Thank you so much, Paula, for your work and sharing your story and how you're helping others get out of narcissistic abusive relationships. So it was a pleasure to have you on the podcast, and thank you so very much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week, and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, KRISTEN, Boyce, BOICE.com. Thanks and have a great day.